You're not the boss of me now. You're not the boss of me now, and you're not so big. Life is unfair.
Hey guys, what's going on? This is the Eric Barber here, and welcome to a brand new tier list of mine. Today I'm doing a tier list of Malcolm in the Middle, a sitcom that ran from 2000 to 2006 by Lindwood Boomer. This seems like kind of a random pick. It is a little bit, but I'm personally a huge fan of this comedy. It's recently having some resurgence in the UK, a little bit in the United States. It was on Netflix at one point, and now it's running on Hulu. In my opinion, it's one of the timeless comedies out there. Granted, not all the seasons hold up really well, but the first few definitely go really well. And, you know, one of the best things about the show are the characters and the side characters that really add to the level of comedy that we see in the show. So I thought for fun, I might as well make a tier list. I found this tier list that had the most amount of characters. I probably wouldn't include everyone. I might add in a few other people that aren't seen, but I'm gonna rate these characters based how they are in the show, mostly on how funny they are, or their growth, or their character development, and whatever else they add to the show. This rating is purely based on the character and not based on their actor or anything existing in the real world. So without further ado, let's get into this. First off, we have Abe Carnarvon. This is a pretty strong pick off the bat. Abe is the father of Stevie Carnarvon, and you know, we see him pretty early on in the show as this kind of timid guy, under a lot of orders from his wife and everything, and he sort of begins to stick up for himself after bonding with Hal a little bit. And you know, throughout the show, he ends up becoming Hal's best friend. I think he has a lot of humorous moments, and he's a very consistent character all the way through. His growth is believable and it's fun. I'm going to put him up at A tier. Abe is a funny guy, and he also brought in, you know, his poker friends into the scene, and for a while those guys were a lot of fun. Next up we have Artie. For those guys who don't know, Artie only appeared in season 3 of the show as someone who worked for like the logging company in Alaska, but he is pretty much doing the same thing that Francis and Eric Hansen were. Pretty minor character, and I really did not find too much that stuck out about him. For that, I'm going to put him in D tier. You know, here you can see him with the string in the tier list picture. Again, I really felt like any character could have filled in that role. Next up, we have Brian. Brian, as aforementioned, is one of Abe's good friends. He's introduced in like the poker game episodes, and he does his job well, definitely, in the show. My only complaint is he's more of like a group character. Outside of it, you don't really get to know anything about him. You know, he has a daughter in one episode, but not even that's really like tied in too well together. He's mostly just an ensemble character there to support the rest of the poker cast crew, and he does not even have too much interactions with Hal personally, outside of some like roasts and stuff. He's a fun character for sure, but you know, he's sort of lacking a little bit for my taste. Next up, we have Caroline Miller. Fun fact about Caroline Miller, she's the only member not in the Malcolm in the Middle family to actually be credited as a main cast member. That might surprise some of you guys, because a lot of people looking back at the show don't really remember her super well, and for good reason. She wasn't in the show a ton, and she gets written out pretty early due to a in-real-life pregnancy. But overall, Caroline Miller was pretty solid, in my opinion. She was a good introduction to the Krellboyne class. I think she didn't really understand like the social structure of the school, so there are a lot of comedic bits played up there, in the sense where you know, she always thought what the Krellboynes were doing would be cool and stuff, and she had some really good moments with Malcolm, where Malcolm would try and take advantage of her at times, of her naivety, and you know, Malcolm would even try and help her out. She's had some great moments with Lois, a little bit of an eye-opening moment with Lois for sure. So for that, I'm gonna put Caroline Miller up in B tier. We have a pretty nice spread so far, no S tiers, but pretty good spread so far. Next up we have Chad one of the more iconic Busey's characters. For those of you guys who have seen Gotham, I personally have not seen Gotham, so maybe I'm wrong here, but I believe he plays the character Jerome in the series Gotham. And here we have Chad here, and he's one of the more iconic Buseys here. I guess one of my gripes with the Buseys as a whole, they sort of just stop appearing, I believe in season 6, for pretty much no reason. This is a fault with the show a lot of the times, unfortunately, where they have some pretty good built-up side characters, but they don't really know how to execute upon them perfectly. Chad, actually, you do get a pretty good deep dive into, and a pretty good sympathetic and funny understanding of the character, so I like him quite a bit. I'm gonna go put him up in B tier. Next up, we have Craig Feldspar. Craig Feldspar, I gotta tell you, is one of the most iconic characters of the show, period. He has some scene-stealing moments for sure. I mean, to put this character in perspective, he was in the first episode of the show, and he was in the last episode of the show. He's one of the most long-time characters of the show. He's been great friends with Dewey. He's been the co-worker of Lois forever. He's had interactions with Hal, with Abe. He's just been around for so long. I'm gonna have to put him in S tier, mostly because I think he's absolutely hilarious. He's always getting in trouble. He's kind of a lazy employee, but also a kiss-up. I feel like that's some real-life application there and everything, so yeah. Next up, we have Cynthia, one of the Krellboynes from the show. She was introduced in the episode Girl Krellboyne, I believe. And Cynthia is actually a little bit of a fan favorite, especially for some potential love interests for Malcolm. I mostly agree with that sentiment. I really like Cynthia in the fact that she was a foil to Malcolm, in the sense that she was, for one, obviously a girl, but two, she had a very different outlook on being in the Krellboyne class that Malcolm just could not understand. And, she definitely called Malcolm out a lot for his pessimistic nature. Unfortunately, she sort of just stopped appearing without any sort of explanation, as I mentioned happens with a lot of characters. This one was kind of jarring as well. So she doesn't get too much screen time, but overall she's a really solid character and is always a lot of fun to have. You kind of root for her when she's around. So I'm going to put Cynthia up in A tier. Next up, we have Dabney. And Dabney, I think, does so well for the whole cogs and gears of the show, because to me, he's the perfect Krellboyne, that perfect dweeb that just gets picked on, but he has just so many funny lines to bring up. He plays the nerd character so well, and there's he brings a good amount of depth to it, and that's all I can say. He gets written out pretty in season 4, along with the other Krellboynes after Cynthia, but he does. But he's definitely a long-standing Krellboyne, and definitely the image that comes to my head when you think of a Krellboyne. So for that, I'm putting him in S tier. Kind of surprising, right? Next up, we have Dewey. Dewey is awesome. I mean, Dewey's start out as this naive little kid that didn't really know much about anything, but was always just kind of there and cute, and he really grew up to be a lot more. It turns out him getting duped all the time by his brothers and stuff, he started being able to start to outsmart him, at least in a social sense, and turns out he's a genius at music. And what I always really liked about Dewey was he was always a kind kid, but his parents never really took the time to even understand that, solely due to the fact that all the other kids were rotten in the family. So that's the plight of Dewey. Overall, I really like that kid, really compassionate guy. And one other thing, before I get too derailed onto the next pick, was Dewey was always to show his kindness was, he accidentally gets placed into the Busey's class, and he stays in it to support them, even though that's not really what his parents want, or maybe it's not even what he wants, but he does it out of his own kindness, which is huge. Next up, we have Dabney's mom, and honestly, she might be one of the only F picks on the show. To be honest, like, it's not even the fact that she's some grouchy old lady. I mean, Ida's a grouchy old lady, and Ida can be funny at times. She was just mostly annoying, and her whole love affection for Dabney, where she had some weird arousal with Dabney, was just really weird. I don't think it fit well, and it just came off as kind of annoying. Definitely, like, nothing against the actress, of course, but I just not really vibe with the character super well. Next up, we have Egg. Fun fact about the actor for Egg, I could be wrong here, but I think I read somewhere that Egg's voice actor or actor is the voice actor for Nemo in Finding Nemo. If I'm wrong, totally apologize. I'll leave a comment down below if I'm wrong. But yeah, Egg, you're going to be surprised by this as well, especially because I've had such a big emphasis on character development. I'm putting him in A tier. And why is that? Well, because Egg is entirely a meme character. You know, I've seen a lot of people post on forums about how they wish Egg appeared in a few more episodes. Nah, Egg's entirely a meme character. He's just for fun. Honestly, if he were put in more episodes just kind of randomly, I'd honestly bump down his ranking. So I think he does his job as a meme well. I thought that episode was just structured perfectly, and he was in it through the whole thing. So I really liked it a lot, despite him not having any lines. I thought that was just hilarious. Next up, we have Eraserhead. This is sort of the fourth Krellboyne in the Krellboyne group. He doesn't really get to do much. He has very minimal lines. Similar to issues with Artie, I'm just going to have to put him in D tier. He doesn't really get to say or do much. He gets picked on by Reese, and then his brother saves him. I don't know, I just really did not vibe with that plot a whole lot, and he just doesn't really get to do much, you know? And because of that, we don't really get to give him a proper assessment. Next up, we have Eric Hansen. He starts out as a cadet with Francis pretty early on. He's not even like his main side cadet. I'm surprised his main sidekick's not even here either, but yeah, Eric Hansen, he's the one that ends up finding the job in Alaska, that gets Francis sent to Alaska. A lot of fun there. He definitely moves Francis's plot quite a bit. You know, they were partners for a big assignment at one point. He's definitely the more responsible one. And he definitely has a lot of funny comedic delivery. He starts out in a really small role, but just grows and grows and grows. And unfortunately, he's let go in season 3 at the very end. But, you know, you could also say that his storyline had come to a close. And I'm glad that he got a proper close for sure. So I'm going to put him in A tier. Next up, we have Cadet Finley. Finley was a pretty minor cadet. He did have some interaction with Francis. The biggest one was when Francis took him to like some stripper event or something, and they ended up seeing like chicken fights. Overall, not a super impactful character. Here you see him with Pico Cabeza. Again, nothing against the character, but he's just one of the characters that just never got developed very much, and we didn't really get to see too much of him at all. I'm going to have to put him into the D tier category. I like him. The actor actually does give some pretty good delivery, and a lot of convincing delivery, actually. You know what? I'm bumping up into C tier. What a blessing that my memory just started working a little bit better there. Here we have Francis, who for a large portion of the show is actually one of my favorite characters. I will say he has one of the best character arcs, starting out as like this reckless vandal that we get introduced to in season 1 to, you know, continuing to rebel against authority in season 1 and 2 and even 3 to a degree. I'd say season 3 could have broken him in some ways, him finding a wife and then becoming a functioning member of the grotto. And that's just huge. unfortunately, I think a lot of it does get squandered away in the latter portions of season 5 and season 6 and season 7 of him ultimately becoming a bum. And I know this is not on the fault of, the actors or even the writers, because there are a lot of behind the scenes circumstances that this resulted to, but unfortunately it did sour Francis's storyline quite a bit. And it's kind of a shame, because Francis, when he would get together with the brothers, I mean, those are some of the best episodes, when he's in the golf cart, or the Halloween episode. Chef's kiss, man, those were amazing. And him reconciling his differences with Lois to a degree in season 4 and 5, delivering Jamie, I mean, that was just amazing writing in my opinion. But it's such a shame that they made him some sort of like bum back to season 1 as soon as season 6 and 7 hit. So unfortunately, I'm gonna have to lower him just a little bit from S tier into the A tier because of what they did to my boy. But it's unfortunate, but that's how it is. Next up, we have Gretchen. She is half of the Grotto, Gretchen and Otto. She's just one of the nicest ladies out there, for sure, in the whole series. She really treats Francis with a lot of respect, and she definitely gives a lot of trust to Francis, despite him being completely random. She's not in the show as much as Otto. She does not really have as much of lines and episodes as much as Otto. Definitely there's just some where it's just Francis and Otto, but she still has a lot of good delivery and a lot of good lines, so I'm going to put her up in A tier. Next up, we have Hal. Oh my god, Bryan Cranston. You guys already know. I'm going to put him up in S tier. The order of the faces don't really matter, but I feel like Bryan Cranston has to be up front. Yeah, Bryan Cranston, Hal. Oh my god. I mean, he's just a powerhouse in this show. I'd say the first few seasons are really more about this sort of battle between the boys and Lois. Hence, the song, you're not the boss of me now, and you're not so big. And Hal's just sort of on the sideline there. But moving past season 1, I think just because Bryan Cranston brings out so many of his acting chops out there, the writers just kept throwing him ridiculous premises, but he just go with it and nail it perfectly. He really pushed the character of Hal beyond limits. And I mean, even Bryan Cranston said, he's never done a character like Hal, and probably won't ever, which is why he loves the show so much too, because it just gave him so much new ground to work with. And his humor just got pushed to crazy limits. You can watch a more recent Bryan Cranston comedy like Why Him with James Franco, and it almost seems like he's playing a neutered version of Hal, because there's just no development for this new guy in the movie to be Hal. I mean, Hal's just amazing, and he kills the role. His emotions are complex. He feels a lot of inadequacy towards how Francis grew up, and how Gretchen and Otto were able to raise Francis into being a fine young boy. He feels a lot of disappointment for Francis when he doesn't win awards. And so because of that, he wants to become close with his own boys, and his relationship with his own father is really complex, even though we only see him once. I love it. I think it's really good. Let's move on before I cry or anything. Next up, we have David Hansen. Not related to Eric Hansen officially, but some people like to say it. He's in the Busey's class, probably the most iconic one for sure. The Buseys, if I have not explained, are the special needs class in Malcolm in the Middle. They're sort of opposite to the Krellboynes, or at least that's how the show wants them to be perceived. I thought David was a really good character, especially for introducing us to the Buseys class and sort of almost the abuse that they went through and all the limitations that they had. I thought David Hansen was great, and I'd even consider him as the leader of the Buseys. And for that, I'm going to put him in at A tier. As you'll know, a lot of A tiers, a few S tiers. I really like this show. I'm sorry, that's my YouTuber bias there. I'm just going to say that. Next up, we have Lionel Herkeby. He is the replacement teacher after Caroline Miller. And I gotta say, I like him at first, especially being in the Krellboyne middle school, or junior high as you could say. He does his job very well. A lot of people compare him to like a Malcolm that never had Lois, stuff like that, just being so neurotic and obsessive towards gifted students and jealous at times. I think he really takes a huge nosedive when he follows the boys to college, and for some reason, picks on Reese, and he even ends up getting shoehorned into this beauty pageant, this mom beauty pageant. He's a judge, and they really tried to build him up as this antagonist of the show, but I sort of feel like he outstayed his welcome. And for that, I'm going to have to put him in D tier. I feel like in the later seasons, he was really hurt. Like, I don't think he should have been the antagonist of the shows they tried to build him up to be. More so this jerk, Krellboyne middle school teacher. And what else also hurts about that is a lot of the Krellboynes left after season 4. All of them left except for Stevie. And, Stevie doesn't even have any interactions with Lionel Herkeby beyond that point. So for him to appear as a teacher or a dean of discipline or a judge, it just doesn't really flow too well for my liking. Next up, we have Ida. Ida, in my opinion, is a really great character, not because she's racist or looks down on people or anything like that. I think she's a great motivator for Lois and even a lot of the other characters. She has a very well-defined relationship with Francis and Malcolm and Reese. Not so much Dewey for whatever reason, but even Hal. You definitely get to understand all their relationships very well. She furthers a lot of the plots in the later seasons. Overall, I think she's a pretty good character. A lot of her jokes are sort of outdated now, but even then they're sort of done to make you feel uncomfortable. So for that, I am going to put Ida in A tier. Yeah, kind of crazy, right? A lot of A tiers, but she's a pretty big character. I mean, she ends up even appearing in the series finale, so that just shows you her level of growth. Next up, we have Jamie, born in the 4th season at the very end, delivered by Francis. Overall, I felt like Jamie's birth could have been a proper ending to the series. That'd probably inflate all these people's rankings, honestly, because a lot of stuff that I'm not a big fan of the show happens past that. But Jamie being born is definitely not like a bad thing to me either. But Jamie as a character, I don't really vibe with. Like, he doesn't really have a lot of jokes himself. At one point, I do like when Dewey has Jamie as his slave and Dewey's Reese's slave. I think that can be funny. A lot of stuff like the jewelry stuff, how he can just find jewelry in the stash. I don't know, a lot of the plot lines don't hit with me, and the fact he's some evil baby trying to kill Lois doesn't really vibe with me as well. You know what, unfortunately I'm going to have to put him in F tier. I thought he had an awesome origin story with that whole giving birth by Lois in the house and by Francis delivering, but it just didn't hit right. Next up we have Jessica. Jessica appears in season 4 as well, when the family's pretty down on their luck, when Hal's working 2 jobs as the babysitter. I thought she did pretty well there as kind of like a manipulator that was smarter than Reese and Malcolm socially. And she does get the upper edge on Malcolm quite a bit. I'd say in the later seasons they bring her back because she has a lot of issues with her dad. And they still just try to bring her up as mostly a manipulator. I think one scene that really did not sit right with me is they introduced that she has a boyfriend in one episode. And, she's trying to, smash him and whatever. And then the next episode, she kisses Malcolm. Not to say that she tries to, date him, but she even gives him hints of dating. It's like this whole character is just built around manipulation and lying and trickery, So, I don't know, for that, I'm not really a big fan. I'm gonna have to put her into the D tier category, unfortunately. Next up, we have Kevin. This is the first Kevin. This is the Krellboyne Kevin. He is a pretty unnotable character, honestly. He replaces Eraserhead as the fourth Krellboyne in the group. He is a poser in that one Clicks episode. Overall, nothing really notable about this guy. Don't really have any reason to dislike him, but not so much a reason to like him. Next up we have Kevin, who is definitely a little bit of an annoying kid. I think he's only like 7, and Malcolm beats him up without realizing that he's 7 because he's a bigger kid than Malcolm, and Malcolm feels really guilty about it. This kid's just kind of gross and annoying, and not even that funny, honestly. Like, the situation was funny, but it's not like Kevin made it funny or anything like that. And he's only in one episode, which I'm completely okay with. Next up we have Kitty Carnarvon. She is the wife of Abe, mother of Stevie. She starts out pretty docile, you know. Lois is doing all sorts of gross things to her, but she's just smiling and shrugging it off. And Lois sort of is the one that gets her fired up and tells her it's okay to yell and scream and, you know, take charge of things. And in my opinion, that's actually what led to the divorce of Abe and Kitty, that sort of pep talk from Lois. So I think that's some really awesome, like, character development, and especially how, like, the Malcolm in the Middle family causes a lot of destruction, even though they don't intend it. I was not really a fan when they sort of brought her back and she just said that she was like partying all the time and hooking up with all these random people, doing all these random sex acts. Not to say like that's immoral, but I just thought that was kind of like out of character for her. And even when they did bring her back, she was absent for a lot of big moments that was just kind of strange for me. Like in the series finale, she's not even with Abe at the graduation. That could have been like a writer's fault for all I know for not including her. But I'll put her in at B tier. Solid character. I think she undergoes a lot of growth and she can be definitely very funny. But yeah, B tier. Next up we have Lavernia. She's honestly the boss that Francis meets when he gets to Alaska. She's not in the show a lot, but she's definitely a pretty prominent player in Alaska. I want to say like she can be a little bit of a foil to Lois in the sense that Francis has this huge mother complex and he blames all his problems on Lois. And here there's a woman that is an authority over him, but treats him worse and expects him to work like a dog, and overall treats him and everyone else like very poorly. So I ultimately like the character for what she represents, but she doesn't really have a lot going on. She does fight Francis, which is cool, and her hockey scenes are really enjoyable as well. So for that, I'm going to put her into B tier. Next up we have Lloyd, and this might surprise you guys as well. I'm just going to put him in here. I'm putting him in A tier. Why not S tier? You know, he plays second fiddle to Lloyd in my opinion. He's just like a little bit more watered down version of Dabney, but Lloyd is honestly a really funny character in his own right, especially in some of the earlier seasons when he's correcting the play over when Malcolm forgets his lines, and he sometimes has a little bit of a jealousy complex, a little bit of a big science mind. Again, I think he's just a perfect Krellboyne, and for what it represents, you know, kind of being a dweeb. Next up we have Lois, played by Jane Kuzmarek. Now she's a super popular character, and in my opinion is sort of like at some point the antagonist of the show, but she builds herself up just like Hal to become more of like a who ends up getting more of her own plots and a lot of her own stories.
Just bring her bags,
definitely at the start, she definitely is sort of like the "you're not the boss of me now," sort of like the mom that they're all trying to rally against. That's really shown in the episode Red Dress. But she really starts to become more of her own identity in later seasons especially, and she's actually, I'd say, quite benefited in the later seasons as well. I'd say overall it does get a more parental focus, and she does have a lot of unique relationships with each of the boys, of course, and with Craig, and even with other characters such as like Caroline Miller, Kitty, especially her own mom, her dad. So she's definitely a really good character to bounce a lot of stuff on, and she definitely carried the show for a while, to say the least. Next up, we have the titular character, Malcolm. Now, Malcolm probably started off really strong. I mean, he's a titular character, I'd say. For a lot of people in the first few seasons, he was probably people's favorites. He definitely was like a little bit whiny, but definitely because of situation, you know, being surrounded by Krellboynes, not having any friends, because he's a Krellboyne, having his brother sent off to military school, stuff like that. I'd really say his character unfortunately starts to nosedive, not like as bad as Lionel Herkeby or anything, because it's still about Malcolm. But he just starts to complain about more stuff when it's not really he's not really a victim of circumstance. Like, he's not a Krellboyne anymore. There aren't even Krellboynes in the show anymore at that point. And he takes Reese's girlfriend for some reason, which is a pretty douchey move, and you know, he tries to justify it at times, and overall he can be pretty narcissistic, but he's going to really be carried through his earlier representations on the show. Overall, I still really like Malcolm, but he can become a little much, and a lot of the characters on the show seem to point that out as well. Next up, we have Malik, one of Hal's poker buddies, or Abe's poker buddies. He suffers from a lot of the same stuff as Brian. He's largely, like, I hate to like conflate them all together, but he doesn't really get a lot of his own standout lines or appearances. I do really like the thing in this picture though is like where he's like, "Why, hello there," something like that to Ida, because she's a huge racist. I actually like that quite a bit. If I had to pick anyone from that same ensemble to really be included here, it would be Trey, because he's the dentist that worked on Hal's tooth in the season 7, and he actually does get a lot of his own exposition and dialogue that is pretty distinct from the crew, so I like that quite a bit. Next up, we have Otto, the owner of the Grotto with Gretchen. I think this character is just super high up there. I mean, he's S tier for a reason. I think he just adds so much comedic delivery to the show. He's so patient and so kind with Francis. He's just a powerhouse of a character. Rest in peace, of course. I kind of did not like how they sort of just said Otto fired Francis because of the ATM error, or got scammed or whatever. Otto was always just so patient with Francis, and he added so much to Francis's being, and, you know, helped shape who Francis is, at least during season 4 and 5, really helped him become a responsible adult. Next up, we have Penelope, and for those of you guys who are fans of iCarly, she actually plays Kat on the show. Janet McCurdy, I believe is her name. I don't know, I haven't seen the show. But Penelope, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to put her pretty low as well. I'm going to put her in D tier. She actually is only in for one episode, solely to replace Zoe, another Busey. Penelope doesn't really have any standout moments from that episode either, aside from the fact that she says she hears voices or something, but honestly, all the Buseys have some weird quirk going on with them, so I don't think that moment is particularly huge or important. Next up, we have Pete. Now, Pete, like Artie, is from the logging area in Alaska. He is just sort of there a lot of the time. He does have one notable episode where he orders a mail-order bride to find true love, but ultimately it's just a balloon. I really like that episode, and you really get to see his compassion and human in him in a very short amount of time. Definitely big props to the actor for that. I'm going to go ahead and put him in C tier. Next up, we have Piyama. Now, Piyama is a powerhouse of a character. She's definitely has a lot of parallels with Lois, which I think was a pretty good inclusion for the character. I mean, Hal and Lois married pretty early, and so did Francis and Piyama. She definitely has like the fire that Lois has, and she definitely brings a lot to the table. Unfortunately, I feel like the writers did not utilize her the best. She definitely could have been so much more, but maybe because of Francis's plot getting sidelined a bit, she couldn't shine as well either. I thought her relationship with Lois is really standout because of how she treats her, because Lois gets treated poorly by Hal's family. Lois treats her pretty much the same way, but eventually they are able to reconcile their differences. Francis and Piyama definitely have a lot of struggles as being a couple that just, got in love really early and just married without even really getting to know each other that well. But I do kind of wish that we got to have more interactions with the brothers and Piyama. They're really too far and few in between. Whenever Francis is with his brothers and Piyama's there, she's mostly just sort of standing around as just to be included, but not really given too much to do. So for that, I'm going to give her A tier. Really like her. She's awesome. Just shy of S tier. Next we have Reese, who is an awesome character in his own right. He's really funny. Definitely was the bully of the show. Definitely was able to give the Krellboins quite the pounding, which probably brought the show full circle in a lot of ways. I really liked, his talent with cooking, all that sort of stuff. Really funny character. I do feel like maybe sometimes they play into the dumb aspect of Reese too much, because sometimes he can be shown to be really smart. Like, he once did a Chris Hansen to catch a predator thing to extort money out of someone, but other times, like, he thinks he's a dog. Or, just one other thing about Reese is I feel like his season 6 plot of him joining the military, I feel like that could have been longer. That could have been like the B plot of the show, especially with Francis leaving for so much of it. But instead, he was just sort of in, I think it was like Afghanistan, and then like left the same day. So, same episode, which was kind of crazy. But I digress. I'll put him in A tier. Next up, we have Richie.
Justin, because we're gonna party!
Sorry, dude, they're in jail.
You're kidding, why?
They got caught trying to steal the giant inflatable panda from the car lot.
Richie's actually one of the more interesting characters on this for me, because he starts out as one of Francis's friends, but you don't even see him being friends with Francis. A lot of times he's just there to do the dirty work for Francis, except for the time that he gets sent to the academy as well. But overall, I really like Richie. He's funny, he's sort of obnoxious, and he's definitely sort of shows what Francis would be like if he never went to military school, just sort of like bumming and doing bum things, I guess. But he's a really funny character, and he has a lot of great delivery. So for that, I'm going to put him all the way in A tier. Wow, and here we've just filled up a row of A tier. That's crazy. Next up, we have Commandant Spangler, who ran the Marlin Academy.
That's quite a handicap.
He's definitely a really good character as well. He tried his best to shape up all the cadets. He's definitely a pretty cruel guy when he needed to be. Pretty strict. He was in it for the first 2 seasons and had a role in season 3 where he got a proper send-off to the character. I didn't think he was necessarily always the most funny. I'll probably put him on Lavernia tier, despite him overall being a really strong character. He definitely doesn't really match up the level of Gretchen or Otto, in my opinion. And last but not least, we have Stevie.
Did you read the last Savage Dragon? When they split him in two? Yeah. Brilliant. I like how we never has to learn a lesson or anything.
Stevie, is just an awesome character. Like Craig, he appeared in the first and last episodes of the show, so that just shows you some of the importance of the character. He is, of course, the child of Abe and Kitty, and he has all these sorts of issues going on with his being in a wheelchair and his breathing disorders, but he still has a really positive outlook and just has some amazing comedic delivery. I mean, he is just so funny, and it's a lot of humor that you've just never really seen before. So I definitely really appreciate that about Stevie. Definitely one of the brightest characters to have around for sure. And I'd say, a lot of ways he's just a great character. So really happy that Stevie stuck around even when a lot of the Krellboynes left. But yeah, guys, that's gonna conclude my Malcolm in the Middle tier list. If you think I got anything wrong here, that's totally okay. It's just my opinion. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos. Also, feel free to let me know who your favorite Malcolm in the Middle character is down below. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and I'll be sure to see you guys later.